Jumping in, I want to share a story you might be familiar with. He once was a young man. He's 27 now. His name's Austin Gutwine. When he was just a normal 9-year-old kid, he saw a video about the devastating effect that AIDS was having throughout communities in Africa. And specifically, as he watched this video, he couldn't believe the number of kids just like him who were left without parents or grandparents, left all alone because of this disease. And he learned that day that there were 2,057 kids orphaned just during the hours of his school day every day. One orphan every 14 seconds. And so this kid, Austin, got an idea that he would use basketball, his love, his favorite sport, to raise some money, to raise some awareness. And his plan was to shoot free throws, 2,057 of them. And he would try to raise $1 per free throw. 2,057 was then his goal. And the plans were coming together. And so on World AIDS Day, Austin was now 10 years old at this point. Austin, he goes to his school's gym at 6 a.m. to start shooting his 2,057 free throws. And he raised more than $3,000 that day. But that was just the beginning for him. Inspired by what might be possible, he wanted to share this experience with others. And so Austin Gutwine, a normal middle school kid, founded an organization called Hoops for Hope, where every year people would shoot free throws and raise money. And over the next 7 years, his organization raised more than $2.3 million. Mind-blowing. At its peak, Hoops for Hope had more than 40,000 participants in a given year. A kid who was so moved by the suffering of others, and then he used his teen years doing something about it. Like, who knows how many lives were changed because of him? Kids in the room, teenagers. I don't know if you know this, but history is full of stories of young people just like you who made a difference in our world because they were moved, they cared, and they did something. But there's this funny thing, right, where these stories of a kid like Austin still kind of surprise us. Because in some ways, our culture doesn't expect kids like you to do stuff like this. Right? Our society can be kind of complainy sometimes about kids. Right? Our society can say that all you care about is watching screens, scrolling social media, playing travel sports. And so society says you're too young, too immature, too selfish to do important things. But Austin Gutwine didn't believe any of those things about himself. And I don't know if you know this, but God is constantly using unexpected people to make an impact in the world. People like you, whether you're kids or teenagers or just bigger, older kids. The passage that Leah and Harmony just read for us is actually a story kind of like Austin's, right? It's a story of an unlikely person who transforms her neighborhood. She becomes the starting place for God's work, for God's mission in the region of Samaria. But to really appreciate the light of this story, sometimes you need to sit in the dark for just a minute. And so before we talk about the woman that Jesus meets at this well, I want to look at one of the real important influencers of Jesus' day. So we meet him just before our story picks up. We meet him right before we meet the woman at the well. And John puts them side by side on purpose so that we hear their stories next to each other. And John chapter 3 introduces this second figure like this. Now there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night. Nicodemus, if you don't know him, let me just tell you, he was kind of a big deal. Right? Every detail in the introduction makes this clear. He's a man. Men were at the top of society in Jesus' world. They were the teachers and they were the leaders. He was a Pharisee, and the Pharisees were known for taking God's rules very seriously. And so they were sort of the like spiritual elite of the day. He's named in the story. And so like we're just told this guy's name is Nicodemus, and not everybody in the story is named. And he is a ruler of the Jews, which tells us that Nicodemus is powerful in Jesus' world. He has significant authority, and he's very likely wealthy. And so Nicodemus is a somebody, right? In every respect, he would have been honored and trusted and respected in this world. Nicodemus is the kind of person that you would put at the top of your list if you were just kind of brainstorming people to recruit for a movement or a cause, right? If we get this guy on our side, everyone else will follow. And here's the deal about Nicodemus. It's not just that everybody else knows who he is. He knows who he is. And he knows what he has, which is why he knows exactly what he has to lose. Right? We're told that he has seen some of the signs that Jesus has performed. And yet those aren't enough yet for him to believe. And so he comes to Jesus. But he doesn't come to Jesus in the day when Jesus is in public teaching and in this very public way. No, Nicodemus comes to him at night. Right? He comes when it's dark and when people are asleep, when no one will see him come to Jesus. See, Nicodemus is aware of his reputation. He's aware of his privilege, and he can't afford to risk it. See, he has too much to lose. Nicodemus will show up 2 more times in John's gospel, and we'll come back to the second appearance. But at the very end of the gospel, the author names Nicodemus and reminds us, Nicodemus, you know, the one who came to Jesus at night. Focusing on that because it's such a critical detail in the story, because while Nicodemus comes by night, trying not to be seen, Jesus' very next encounter happens at the brightest moment of the day. It happens in the light. Jesus comes to this Samaritan woman at a public place in the middle of the day. And we can just start by noticing actually the difference between Jesus and Nicodemus. Nicodemus is afraid of associating with the wrong kind of people. And so he hides his associations. He hides his meetings. But Jesus has a bit of a reputation at this point, a bit of a habit for hanging out with the wrong kinds of people. And so Jesus isn't shy about it. He just does it right out in the open. Jesus has very little interest in the kind of street cred that he might get from being seen with Nicodemus during the day. And so he's fine with meeting him at night. He's not looking for him in the day. But Jesus also has very little interest in the kind of shade that he might get being seen with a Samaritan woman in the daylight. And so let's just notice from the story we heard how this woman is introduced to us. And the first is just to note that she's a woman, which at a time when women were often treated as second-class citizens, Jesus shows up, asks her for a drink, has a conversation with her. And this is clearly weird because the disciples show up and go, "Why are you talking to a woman?" She's unnamed, right? We're never told who she is. She's a Samaritan or an enemy. The Jews and the Samaritans had long been next door rivals, so that Jews who were traveling between the northern part of their country and the southern part of their country would often travel extra far to go around Samaritan territory rather than just go the most direct route through it. We also know that this woman, she worships at the wrong place and in the wrong way. So while Nicodemus, a Pharisee, was busy making sure that God's people followed God's rules precisely, the Samaritans had developed their own worship practices that made them seem like they just weren't serious about God's laws. And then lastly, she's been discarded. Now, we don't know her whole situation, but we're told that she's been married 5 times. And I don't know what you think about when you think of somebody who's been married 5 times, but this is what it means for her in her context. It means that she has had 5 husbands who have either died or divorced her, right? Because she lives in a world at a time when a woman could not divorce her husband. So it's possible that she's lost husbands to death and been sent away by other husbands. And now, the man who is supposed to be her husband, the man who is probably legally responsible for taking her as a wife, seems to be unwilling to accept that obligation. Now, we don't know her situation entirely, but we can say this about her. She is not the social pillar that Nicodemus is. Right? Among the Jewish community that Jesus comes from, a community where Nicodemus is everything, she would have been nothing. And it's these massive differences between these two people that start to bring to the surface the beautiful message that John is trying to communicate. For instance, as you spend some time with the story and you think, why do we get Nicodemus' name and not the Samaritan woman's? Well, at least one possibility is that Bible scholars have this theory that sometimes an unnamed person is unnamed in a story because the community hearing the story knows who that person is, and their listening, their knowing of that person invites a kind of participation. So this person may have actually been in the early church, right? And it wouldn't be hard to imagine the church in Samaria years later, hearing this story together, remembering how the church in Samaria got its start with this woman. And then this community says together, Tabitha, I just made up Tabitha because it's a good Jewish name. Praise God for Tabitha and her testimony. Like, everybody knows who Tabitha is, or whatever her name is. And they celebrate, and they know. And so not using the name is a way to invite the community who knows who she is to join in, to add her name to the story. On the other hand, Nicodemus gets named. And then it's so interesting to notice each time he's brought up again. The author gives this reminder about who he is. He gets kind of reintroduced. It's almost like this guy who was everything years later has been forgotten. And so John needs to keep his memory alive. Nicodemus, you know, the one who, later, Nicodemus, you know the one I'm talking about. He's like fishing. Remember Nicodemus? But Nicodemus, who was everything, has been forgotten. And the unnamed Samaritan woman, who was nothing, is remembered. Of course, this is a little bit of speculation, right? I admit that. But here's what we can say for sure, reading, meditating on this passage. Jesus gives Nicodemus one message, and he gives the Samaritan woman another message. I mean, technically it's the same message, but it has been tailored to two distinct hearers. Right? These messages are perfectly suited to who he is talking to and what they need. And it's important to notice this because this is where we begin to notice how God might be speaking directly to us right where we are, speaking a message that we need right now. To Nicodemus, what does Jesus say? You need to be born again. And to the Samaritan woman, he talks about drinking living water. Same message, two totally different hearers. It's fascinating, right? To the man who has everything, what more could Nicodemus want? The guy who needs nothing. Here's what he's being told by Jesus. Great, you want to enjoy God's kingdom? You want to follow me? Cool. Start over. Literally be born again. You need a new life because your old one is just going to get in the way. If you want a chance of learning what it is to live with God, to know God deeply, you're going to have to shed all that you have built for yourself. You need to be born again. But to the woman who has nothing, who has no status, who has no place, you know what she's told? Jesus just says, come, drink. I am the source of living water, so come and drink from me. A man who has everything to lose, he can't wrap his mind around Jesus' invitation to be born again. He gets all tangled up in the metaphor. It's like he's trying to find a loophole. Come on, Jesus, what do you mean? That's not possible. And he takes him a bit too literally. He's looking for a way to not have to give up everything, to not risk his life, to not risk his status and his privilege and his wealth. And he keeps asking questions. But you see that he's not actually trying to understand what Jesus is offering. And this woman who has nothing to lose, right? She asks questions too. But her questions come from a genuine place of wanting to understand. Drink living water. And she goes, where do I find it? And then Jesus explains that he is the one that she should drink from. And whether she totally gets it or not, right? That's actually not the point. She believes that Jesus has what she needs. She just believes that Jesus has what she needs. And so she says, okay, sir, then give me this water. Give me this water so that I will not be thirsty. And just asks Jesus for the thing. She hears him speak and she believes. Nicodemus, on the other hand, right, has seen Jesus perform these incredible signs, but he doesn't believe. He just comes to question. The differences between these people are endless. Chapter 7, we find Nicodemus among powerful elites, and they're debating whether to arrest Jesus, what to do with him. And so Nicodemus, who has seen Jesus' signs and has actually talked to Jesus face to face, he's been in his presence, he kind of speaks up in this crowd of people who clearly don't like Jesus, and he's kind of like, well, shouldn't we give him the benefit of the doubt? Maybe we should hear him and maybe look at what he's doing. But you've seen this person, right? Who has experienced Jesus, but then is maybe just kind of Jesus isn't that bad. And then like hides back down. But this is so different from the Samaritan woman, right? Who encounters Jesus and then, having found the source of living water, should I say like the source of living water, having found her, she can't keep it to herself. And so she runs back to the neighborhood and she tells everyone, come, right? See a man who told me everything I ever did. Can this be the Christ? And they went out from the town and were coming to Jesus. Many Samaritans from that town, they believed in him because of the woman's testimony. And many more believed because of Jesus' word. This reminds me of something that happened last night. After Kate's soccer game, a bunch of families went and got frozen yogurt. But I was hungry, didn't want frozen yogurt. I got food next door. And Kate saw me come back with some French fries, and she came over and she helped herself to them. And apparently, I didn't know this happened. She like went back to this group, announced to them she had just tasted the greatest French fries she had ever eaten in her entire life. And so, before I knew it, we're leaving, and I'm like, where's Kate? She had convinced her friend and their family to go buy some French fries, not only for themselves, but also for her. This is what happens when we taste something so good that we have to share it, right? Like we know what happens when we taste and see that something is good. The Samaritan woman, she has had her thirst quenched by Jesus, by water she didn't even know existed. And so she does the only thing we all do when we have this experience. She runs back home to tell everyone, all of her neighbors about it. You gotta try some. And then she brings them back to taste and see Jesus for themselves. And maybe this is why the Samaritan woman isn't named. Because sometimes when characters are named in the story, it's too easy to go, oh yeah, that was Peter. I would never do that. Obviously, Nicodemus did that. But sometimes when a character is unnamed, there's this deep biblical sense that we might find ourselves being written into the story as we say, I could be that woman. Right? The Samaritan woman is you. If you, having nothing, no status, no privilege, nothing you're clinging to, you just hear Jesus offering you a drink and you take it. And you realize that he's now given you everything you need. And now, having had your thirst quenched, you might be the Samaritan woman. If you have nothing to lose and now you find yourself running off to share this living water, this Jesus, with everyone else who needs a drink. Another possibility exists, right? Maybe if having encountered Jesus, you rarely talk about him, or you're afraid of what you might lose if you're too public about him. Maybe you are a bit like Nicodemus. You've acquired too much for yourself, built too much to lose, and so there's no room for Jesus in the life that you've constructed, and you like your life, and you don't want to, you don't need to be born again. And so Jesus, for you, right, maybe isn't a source of joy that you're eager to share with everybody, but maybe just a curiosity, or maybe just an obstacle. But if you find yourself living out Nicodemus' story, let me encourage you, he's already been named. There's already a Nicodemus. We don't need any more. Jesus doesn't need another Nicodemus. You can walk a different path. You can start over with Jesus. Today, he's offering you living water, a new beginning, and you can have life. Jesus is inviting you to himself this morning. He is inviting all of us to himself.